On today's episode, we review the most expensive casting rod that I've ever purchased. We also get to hear about a new species of fish being caught in Nebraska and the recent New York State Record Largemouth, and we discuss spillway fishing, cheap kayak mods, and making unique friendships through fishing. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors, Mossy Oak, and Dakota Lithium.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. As always, we are brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. And right now, you can go over to AmericanLegacyFishing.com and you can browse some of the brand new gear that they already have for pre-order from ICAST 2024. They've also got some brand new options already in the store, like the Nico Rama from Big Bite Baits. But you can go over there, you can pre-order things like the new Shimano Vanford FA, the new Shimano Poison Atrina. All of that stuff is over there on the website right now, but as always, they're a great place to check for anything you need. Any rod, reel, line, and ever-expanding line of baits. They also have the internet's best selection of lightly used gear. If you've had your eye on a certain rod or a certain reel, but you can't quite spring the money for it brand new, they have mint condition fishing gear ready for you over on the website if you click used gear. All of that from a great Midwestern tackle shop right in southern Indiana that actually cares about their folks enough to give you great customer service, fast shipping, a price match guarantee on the website. If you find a better price somewhere else, message them. They will match it. They are great folks that want to make sure they take care of you and put the best fishing gear in your hands. You can go over to www.americanlegacyfishing.com, check out everything they have to offer, and as always, use code TACKLETALK10. Tackle Talk 10 saves you 10% on almost everything on the website that's not already on sale or one of the few excluded brands. Almost everything, 10% off with code Tackle Talk 10 over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. All right, everybody, the first thing we're going to do here today, we have a couple headlines that we need to talk about over the past few weeks that I at least want to bring to your attention. The first story was published on July 27th from Gretchen Eichenberg over at Fox News, and it says, Nebraska fisherman reels in new fish species in state, bright orange with turquoise. So a lot of you are probably hearing that and thinking, man, that sounds like a pumpkin seed, right? Or a regular long-ear sunfish or something. That's exactly what I thought too. A lot of them have the exact same color pattern. So what's so special about a sunfish being caught in Nebraska? They're everywhere. Well, I thought the exact same thing, but the second subheadline of this article says long-ear sunfish had not been documented in Nebraska before. So that's even weirder to me, right? What do you mean that a long-ear sunfish has never been seen in Nebraska before? What the heck are you guys doing over there? Pumpkin seeds, long-ear sunfish, they're all over the place here in southern Ohio. I mean, our state record long-ear sunfish is something like a pound and 10 or 11 inches long, an absolute dinner plate of a long-ear sunfish. So this whole story is weird to me. So then I got to thinking, is this really the first time it's actually been caught in Nebraska? Or is this just an example of a big news company writing an article about fishing that they don't know much about for clicks? So I don't know either. Let's read it together here. It says, a new fish species has been recorded in Nebraska after a fisherman reeled in a colorful creature. We hear about new species in Nebraska from time to time, but most of them are unwanted invasive species. Daryl Bauer, Fisheries Outreach Program Manager for the state's Game and Park Commission, told Fox News Digital. I get reports almost every year of aquarium fish that were illegally released into our waters and then found dead or even caught by other anglers. But last week, Bauer got a call from his friend Scott Buss, an avid angler who caught a 5 1/4 inch, 2-ounce long-ear sunfish. It's a bright orange fish with turquoise markings that is native to Kansas. This was the first time in all of my career that I've ever heard of a long-ear sunfish being caught in Nebraska, Bauer said. They are beautiful fish, and I was thrilled to get the message from Scott Buss and to see his photo. It got even better when he was able to bring the fish to me to show me. The catch was made with a rod and reel and a nightcrawler worm. I do a lot of fishing for multi-species fish, so I like to catch a little bit of everything, Buss of Norfolk, Nebraska told Fox News Digital. I certainly wasn't specifically fishing for sunfish, but I was using a small hook and a small bait, which gives you a chance to catch a lot of different stuff, more than just your typical catfish. Buss said he was floating around a piece of worm and a small hook and a bobber when he got the bite and pulled the fish from the river. Immediately, I said, "Whoa, that's different," Bus said. "It's a very cool looking fish. I looked at it and then I said, that's a long ear. And I knew it hadn't been officially documented here before, so I kind of struggled on what to do next." Bus kept the potential record-setting fish in an aerated bait cooler and brought it to the commission office, where it was officially documented and recognized as the first state record for the species in Nebraska. By far the most exciting thing about that fish was that none of these have ever been caught in Nebraska before and how beautiful it was, Bauer said. "You just never know what you're going to catch," Bus said of his fish. "An old 50-inch muskie, a 10-pound walleye, or a 2-ounce sunfish. It's all exciting." Okay, so to their credit, I guess, they actually talked to Daryl Bauer of the Nebraska Parks and Game Commission. He also corroborated this claim, and he said that it was the first time that he'd heard of a long-ear sunfish in Nebraska. So that to me is wild. I mean, that's a very common, annoying little fish around here, not something noteworthy by any means. So I had no idea that there were places like Nebraska that didn't have them at all. I just assumed they were everywhere, and everywhere had every kind of sunfish and bluegill, but I guess that's not the case. So I learned something today. Hopefully you guys did too. I guess fish that we take for granted around here, like little sunfish subspecies, could be a really cool catch and a big deal in places that don't have them that I assumed did have them. Okay, our next story here is a little more significant, I would say, in my eyes than the last, and this is a story that comes to us from New York with the headline, "New York State Record Largemouth Bass Caught in Cayuga Lake." And the subheadline says, "Tournament angler Jim Breitenbaugh caught and released a whopping 12-pound, 6-ounce largemouth bass on Cayuga Lake during practice." Now, this is a really long article, so I'm not going to read this whole thing. We'll just hit the important parts. But onthewater.com says, on July 11th, 2024, Jim Breitenbaugh, a tournament angler from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, caught and released the New York State Record Largemouth bass. For almost 40 years, the record had been held by John Higby's 11-pound, 4-ounce largemouth, but during a day of tournament practice on Cayuga Lake, the 1987 record was dethroned by a largemouth bass that weighed a full 1 pound, 2 ounces more. Jim Breitenbaugh lives approximately 5 hours from Cayuga Lake, which is home to some of the best bass fishing in the Finger Lakes region and on a larger scale in New York State. Cayuga Lake boasts a robust largemouth bass fishery, and for those who are keen to it, some giant tournament-winning quality smallmouth bass as well. In fact, just over 2 years ago, Cayuga Lake gave up the state record smallmouth bass when an 8-pound, 6-ounce specimen was caught on a Berkeley Max scent minnow. That fish still holds the record today. It's no wonder that the Bassmaster Elite Series returns to Cayuga every few years. Part of what makes Cayuga Lake such a rich bass fishery is its diversity of forage fish, which includes alewives, rainbow smelt, gizzard shad, and invasive round gobies, along with bluegill and pumpkin seed sunfish. Now, with 2 state record bass on the charts, Cayuga holds the unofficial crown of New York's best big bass lake. By his own admission, Breitenbaugh considers himself a smallmouth guy at heart, but he maintains his love for largemouth bass too. Any lake where I can target smallmouth and largemouth bass is an amazing opportunity. I enjoy both of them for different reasons, said Breitenbaugh during a recent interview. During practice, Breitenbaugh was working his bait back through grass in 8 to 10 feet of water when he got hit right next to the boat. I reeled down into it, and when I set the hook, it felt like I set into a cinder block, he said. My rod doubled over, and I thought I was snagged for real, Breitenbaugh continued. Then all of a sudden, I felt the heavy head shakes, but I still didn't think it was a bass. For a good minute, Breitenbaugh said he battled the fish as it tried to bury itself in the grass. Equipped with a 610 medium power rod with an extra fast action, he was slightly undergunned for the task. That rod is really made for finesse applications like Ned rigs, so this fish was just kicking my, and I won't say the word because we are a family-friendly show, but another word for behind. So he goes on for another couple paragraphs here about the fight. I won't read them all. I'll summarize it here for you. It fought hard. So then it says, his partner netted the fish, flipped the net into the boat, and looked at Breitenbaugh in disbelief. Neither one of us remembers what we even said in that moment. All I know is that we had competitors close by, and we kind of kept it quiet and low-key, said Breitenbaugh. In order to keep the fish under wraps in the moment, his tournament partner stood strategically blocking the live well until they had enough space around them away from other anglers. We pulled her out of the live well, and I figured it was probably a 10-pound fish, and definitely my PB, said Breitenbaugh. It was freakish looking. When Breitenbaugh saw the scale read 12.08, Rourke exclaimed, "Was that a 12?" and immediately looked up the record on his cell phone. "It's a state record," Rourke exclaimed. Breitenbach couldn't believe his eyes. In that moment, I'm thinking, there's no way this just happened to me, he chuckled. So in the end here, the article, again, goes longer than this, but it gets certified by the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, which I think is like their, Division of Wildlife or whatever it is, on a certified scale at 12 pounds and 6 ounces, beating the old New York State record by 1 pound, 2 ounces. So an absolute behemoth of a northern strain largemouth in July, too. So just a crazy fish, crazy catch, and state record largemouth and smallmouth don't get broken very often these days. So anytime that it does, it's newsworthy. But this time, it didn't just beat it by an ounce or something. It beat it by over a pound. And he did it in the dead middle of summer, which is crazy. So a big congratulations to Jim. I know we're a little late and behind on this story with iCast in our past few episodes, but those were two of the more interesting news articles that I've came across recently in the fishing world. Okay, folks, next up here, we are doing it today. Today, I am finally going to talk about a rod that I have used heavily over the past year, a rod that I am semi-embarrassed to even own because it's so out of the ordinary for me to spend this much on a rod. But just like we talk about some budget rods and reels on the show, and I know some of you love to hear about those budget options, the Bass Pro Qualifier reels, Shimano SLX line of rod and reels, Dobbins Fury rods, Fenwick Eagle rods, some of those favorites that are in that $99 to like $120 price point. Today, we're going to go the exact opposite direction. And I've really only quote unquote reviewed a rod in this price range one other time in the history of this show, and it was the G Loomis NRX Plus, but that was an 872 spinning rod. So today, we're going to review a very expensive casting rod, the Megabass P5 Destroyer Tequila Baccarac. So this rod retails at $499, and it's a fairly tough rod to find sometimes. It's often sold out. Not everywhere, obviously, carries this type of rod, but I picked this rod up about a year ago when I was searching for the best kayak swim bait and glide bait rod that I could find. And say what you want about, big glide baits and big swim baits, because the baits themselves are so expensive. You're looking at $100, $150, $200 per bait for a really nice handmade, finely tuned glide bait, but it seems weird to throw those type of baits that you've invested that much money in on a rod that you haven't heavily invested in. So throwing like a $200 glide bait on a $50 rod seems odd to me. You're just in a different world at that point. The bait is so meticulously crafted and weighted and tuned by their creators that I felt like I should put the same amount of time and effort into finding a rod that was best suited for those finely tuned baits. So after probably a month of trial and error with probably 5 to 6 different rods, some of which were like a Shimano Intenza, Dobbins Champ XP, a Shimano Poison Adrena, a Dobbins Fury, and some other ones, I landed on, of course, the most expensive rod I tried, which was the Megabass P5 Destroyer Tequila Baccarac. And I just could not put this rod down when I was trying all of these different rods. And what I ended up using this rod for slowly morphed from like a rod specifically for big glide baits and swim baits to a whole lot more than that. So I know this is a rod that's probably going to be out of a lot of people's price range, but I've enjoyed this rod so much recently that I feel like we have to talk about it. So for those of you that will never buy a $500 rod just out of principle, I hear you. I completely understand it, but there will be some nuggets in here that you can take away the next time that you're shopping for a similar rod at any different budget level. And for those of you that do have the funds to consider something in this realm now or someday in the future, I'm going to do my best to break down what I really enjoy about this rod, what I wish I could change, and why I've had such a hard time getting it out of my hands. So let's start with the superficial, the looks of this rod. Probably the least important part of a rod to me, but an important part of a rod nonetheless, because at the end of the day, a rod has to sell. And to sell, it has to look like something that people want to be seen using and they want to pick up off a shelf. So the looks of this rod, I'm going to call casually elegant. I think that might be an oxymoron. If it is, I'm sorry, but that's what I'm going with. It's got my favorite overall look to a rod, which is a matte black rod with a split grip, blonde cork handles, without a lot of the frills on it, except these very, very muted, dark slate gray, blue wrappings above and below each guide. And then it's got some sort of like a silvery yellow accent to the lettering on the blank to indicate the model, the power, all of that kind of stuff, and the Megabass Destroyer logo. The only thing looks-wise that I don't like about this rod is the knob of the reel seat. So right above your reel, the part that screws in and out to attach or detach your reel, it's one of those, like, I don't even really know what to call them. I call them emperor knobs. It just looks like something that would be found on like the cane that's held by a king or a Roman emperor or something. It's just like royal-ish looking, and I hate them. And there are other rods out there that have this exact same type of knob at the top of them. I think one of the first ones I can remember seeing was from Favorite Rods. It might be the Big Sexy. Hold on a second. I'm actually Googling this right now because I don't want to get this wrong. No, okay, so it's that's funny. It's actually called the Emperor, the Favorite Rods Emperor. So that's obviously where I'm getting the name Emperor from, stuck in my head when I think of this knob. So the Emperor rods from Favorite Rods is a good example. Just look that up and you'll see what I'm talking about. I hate the look of it. It's gaudy. It's over the top. It's not necessary. Just give me a regular screw top on my reel seat and I will be happy. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really affect performance of this rod as much as it just annoys me because of the way it looks. But aside from that, it's a beautiful rod. But the problem is, looks don't catch fish. If they did, I'd probably get skunked more often. So let's move on to what actually matters, and that's the features of this rod, the performance of this rod, the durability of this rod, and the value. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Mossy Oak. Now, I know when you think Mossy Oak, you probably think camouflage, you probably think hunting season, and while it is true that Mossy Oak makes some of the best proprietary camouflage patterns in the outdoors industry, they also make some of the sharpest patterns for on-the-water clothing as well. With awesome patterns like hailstone, Arctic ice, high seas, and more, you can look and feel like a pro out there on the water with Mossy Oak fishing apparel. Between their long sleeve and their short sleeve tech shirts featuring their signature Hydroplex technology, built-in microfiber patches for cleaning your sunglasses, and UPF sun protection, to their fishing shorts and casual wear, they've got something for everybody. There's a reason why so many pros like Kevin Van Dam, Hank Parker, Gerald Swindle, Ott Defo, and more choose Mossy Oak. And you can too. All you have to do is go over to www.store.mossyoak.com and click fishing at the top of the homepage to get started. Again, that's www.store.mossyoak.com. Trust the best with Mossy Oak. So, features, this rod is 7 foot long, even. It's an extra heavy, it's a regular action, and it's rated for 3/4 ounce lures to 4 ounce lures, and it's rated for 12 to 30 pound line. So a very, very unique rod in the sense that it's shorter than most comparable rods in this category at 7 foot even, and it's listed as an extra heavy, but it's got a regular taper. So it's got more of like a moderate bend rod than your normal fast or extra fast rod. So it is a short, extra heavy, moderate rod. Not something you see very often in your big box stores or on your shelf every day. Usually your extra heavies are going to be big fast actions or flipping, frogging, stuff like that. They're going to be 7.2, 7.3, 7.6, 7.11. This is a stubbier rod at 7 foot even, and it's rated to throw dang musky lures on with a maximum of 4 ounces in weight. Now, from Megabass, it says the F7 70X Tequila Baccarac is an extra heavy powered regular taper rod ideally suited for the challenges of versatile monster hunting. With the 5D graphite system's high tension and high torque power coursing through its veins, the F7 70X displays a tenacious ability to control swim baits, big baits, and larger frogs like the big gabbit in and around heavy cover. Impeccably balanced, resolutely powerful, and surprisingly versatile, the Tequila of Baccarac is an unparalleled monster hunter. So they specifically call out frogs, swim baits, and then what they call big baits. And I can vouch vouch for at least 2 of those. One of those, maybe not so much, we'll get to here in a second. But some of the features here on this rod are what they call the Destroyer Head Locking System 3, which is a fancy term for that stupid knob on top of the reel seat that I don't like. It's got a 3D dynamic performance grip. It's got Destroyer Original Tight Threading Fuji Titanium SICS guides. It's got the IBCS reel seat, 5D graphite, and a few other things on that list. Now, like any other rod from any other company, there's a lot of mumbo jumbo there that doesn't really mean a whole lot to us. It just sounds cool. But as far as features go that actually matter to me, that I'll describe for us regular anglers, it has a lot more cork on the butt section of that split grip than most of the other rods that I have that are around the 7-foot range. And I actually ended up liking that because it gives you a lot more leverage and a lot more place to grip when you're out there tossing and chucking big baits where you actually have to put that second hand back there to kind of stabilize the rod as you cast. So having that extra grip down there for my non-dominant hand was really pleasant to have, even though I didn't think about it when I actually bought this rod. It's got a very comfortable reel seat on it where your pinky and your ring finger of the hand that you have around your reel actually make direct contact with the blank, but it's not too exoskeleton-y and too bare bones like a lot of the reel seats that people are trying to do today, where there's just like nothing there and they're like, look, you can touch the blank, and you're like, yeah, you can touch the blank, but it feels weird and I don't like it. I also have to have something that conforms to my hand and feels comfortable while I'm using it. This is a nice mix of that. There's still enough meat there to get a good grip, which is important when you're tossing around some of the big baits that we're going to discuss here in a second. And then one of my absolute favorite features of this rod is the guides themselves. Now, when I was looking at this rod for big glide baits, I didn't even think about this until I started using this rod, but one of, if not the best feature about this rod is that all of the guides, all 9 guides below the tip, are double-footed on the rod. So most rods, the guides that are closest to the reel, the biggest guides, those will be double-footed to the blank, but as you go up the rod, it stops. So like I have a Zillion sitting right beside me, a Zillion rod. It has 8 guides below the rod tip, and only 3 of those 8 have any sort of double footing to the rod. So I don't know the technical name for it. Maybe double footing is not the right one, but you guys know how like your bigger eyelets on your casting rods have like one piece of metal that makes a foot that goes one direction on the blank, and then it has another foot that points the other direction above the eyelet, and then one below the eyelet. And so it has 2 contact points to the blank, and it's a little bit more reinforced, a little bit stronger, less likely to bend on you. That's what I'm talking about. Not only do the couple near the reel have that, all of the eyelets up that rod blank have that double footing, which is great because you're out there throwing really stressful baits on this rod. You're chucking 2-ounce glide baits, or you're out there, fighting these big smallmouth and big largemouth that are sassy on these big baits. I want the confidence to know that those eyelets are going to stand up to those big weights and that abuse that I'm going to put this rod through. And it was clearly built for heavy duty, tough techniques in that regard. Now, another feature that I don't love as much is the smaller trigger behind your pinky that holds the reel. So Megabass has done this, in other rods too. Small triggers. I don't get the appeal of them. It's annoying. I'd rather have a bigger, longer trigger guard to keep my hand in place, especially if I'm going to be out there throwing the types of lures that this rod is made for. I mean, they mentioned frogging in the description. Give me a little bit more security behind my hand than that kind of baby trigger right there. I mean, I've gotten used to it, so it doesn't really bother me that much anymore, but when I first picked up this rod, it was something that I just wish I could have changed. But that's the surface level stuff about this rod, the stuff you can see with your eyes, that you can feel in the store. But what about on the water? What made this rod so special? This rod is intriguingly versatile. Just when I think I found the techniques that this rod handles best, it surprises me with another one. So like I said, I originally fell in love with this rod for big glide baits. Now, why glide baits? Why was I drawn to this rod? Well, it sure as heck wasn't the price tag. It was because I was looking for a shorter, more moderate, beefy rod that could handle that weight load while still being light enough and balanced enough for my wrists to work it for hours at a time. And those two things usually don't don't go hand in hand. In fact, most big glide baits and big swim bait rods are like 7.9, 7.11. They're huge rods. They're like right above a bass rod, but just below a musky rod. And I guess that's okay if you're out there chucking and winding big glide baits or something all day, but I was looking for something to fish these more nuanced big baits on, especially big single-jointed, slow-sink glide baits where it takes some wrist and the right cadence to really work and control and get the most out of that bait. So I wanted a rod that was short enough that I could work it with the rod tip down out of my kayak without banging on things and walk that glide bait comfortably. And I can't do that with an 8-foot giant swim bait rod. So I asked the boys at ALF. I tell you guys all the time, you can call them, you can email them, you can ask American Legacy Fishing for recommendations. So I asked them what would they recommend, and this was one of the 5 or 6 rods that they told me to look into. And after trying all of the others, this was the one that as soon as I threw out, that first cast with a Chad Shad, that first cast with my Clutch Eco or my big Nessies or whatever I was throwing that day to test this thing out, this was the rod that I kept coming back to. For instance, the Shimano Intenza was a nice price point, but it was a little too stiff. The Dobbins 736C, I tried and it was just a little too fast for my liking, but the Megabass P5, this Tequila Baccarac, was lighter than all 5 or 6 of those other rods I tried. It balanced better and it was more comfortable to work at that angle and cadence that I was looking for. And it was the exact action that I was looking for out of this rod too. So it's got a fairly soft tip for as heavy of a rod as it is. And when it loads up, I would say you get a really nice bend of this rod to about the 3rd eyelet past the tip. So, 4th eyelet, depending on how you want to look at it. But from there on out, from that like 3rd or 4th eyelet back is just a really nice, strong backbone that finishes up that load all the way to the reel seat. So it's just an all-around great taper for big swim baits and big glide baits. It's not too moderate where it feels like a noodle, but it's not too fast either. So you get that deeper bend in that rod, keeping those fish pinned on those treble hooks. So I really dig the Tequila Baccarac's action for those big glide and swim baits. But I mentioned that this rod is versatile, and that is the coolest part about this rod. So when I bought this rod, it was actually like very late fall, almost early winter. And at that time, it's not exactly big glide bait city around here once like the first snow starts falling and stuff like that. So for the first 2 to 3 months that I owned this rod, I actually threw Alabama rigs on it more than anything else. And let me tell you, this is a beast of an Alabama rig rod. Now, it's not going to cast as far as some of those other longer specialized rods. Of course it's not, because it's shorter. But dude, I was messing around at these local lakes and rivers around here, and I was smoking fish all winter long on these giant, stupid Temu Alabama rigs that we've talked about before. And I say stupid playfully, right? Because they are still the Alabama rig that's my go-to. They're like $2 to $3. They last probably 40 to 50 fish usually for me. But I was actually throwing those big A-rigs with like 5 separate 3/16 ounce jig heads on them, and then plastics on all of those jig heads. Big paddle tail swim baits on each one of those jig heads. I'd cut 2 of the hooks, and then you'd have like, I don't know, whatever that is, a full ounce of lead right there just in the jig heads, plus the A-rig, plus the 5 swim baits. I mean, I don't know, but I'm guessing that A-rig was probably, 1.5, 2 ounces by the time everything's said and done. And the 7-foot beast of a rod was handling it no problem. I was catching multiple fish at a time, 2 19s in one cast, plus the 1.5 ounce chandelier that I'm out there throwing. So you got maybe 7 to 8 pounds of like mad fighting fish. And this rod took it like a champ. But what I absolutely love about this being a shorter rod is because I'm in a kayak and being a shorter guy myself, that would be a recipe for difficulty with a longer rod. Longer rods make it harder to work that down angle that I like to use, especially for something like a swim bait or a glide bait. It also causes more issues in the back cast and tighter places, especially if you're throwing like a big A-rig or something. So because of where I fish and how I fish, the shorter rod was easier for me, and it eliminated some of the headaches that those big 7, 11, 8-foot swim bait rods were going to give me in that kayak. I've just learned for big baits like that, I would much rather have this type of rod. Now, if I was out there in the middle of Lake Erie or middle of Lake St. Clair or something, and I have all of this room and I'm just looking to chuck as far as I can, then yeah, this might not be the rod for you. But if you're in the situation that I was, tight quarters in a kayak, I'm a shorter guy, I need help landing those fish, the 7-foot rod actually was really, really nice nice to have. So for glide baits, it was great. For swim baits, it was great. For Alabama rigs, it was great. Well, one day I was out on the kayak. I forgot to bring my Dobbins 736 CB glass with me that I usually use for chatterbaits, and I was out there and it just looked like a chatterbait day. So what did I do? I tied on a chatterbait to this rod, this Tequila Baccarac Megabass P5 Destroyer, and you know where this is going. As long as that chatterbait was like a half ounce or heavier, this rod felt better than my 736 CB glass because it was still moderate enough that it wasn't like a fast or an extra fast where I felt like I was loading up too fast, which I've obviously come to not really like for chatterbaits. This had more of a backbone than that 736 CB glass, but still had that action I liked, which is probably the one thing that I wish I could change about that 736 CB glass. Just take the backbone meter up like 2 notches. The P5 does that. So even for heavy chatterbaits, like again, half ounce and up, it was awesome. And this is what I've been throwing my heavier chatterbaits on lately. I was also throwing coal shads and mag drafts on it, and it was great. Dude, I even deep cranked with this rod for like 2 days. I threw a DT16 on it. I threw an 8XD on it. This rod handled both of those pretty well too. Now, my reel wasn't great for them. I had a little faster reel on it. I wish I would have had something like a 5 or a 6-1 to go deep cranking with, but either way, in a pinch, it worked great. Even big spinner baits, I would say probably as long as you're above a 3/8 or maybe above a half ounce, it's a winner for spinner baits too. Now again, for smaller spinner baits, smaller chatterbaits, no, because it's a little too heavy, but your bigger stuff, it can definitely handle just fine. But then on the performance side, the couple things that I didn't like it for, ironically, are what a lot of people only buy this rod for, which would be like flipping and pitching heavy jigs and Texas rigs or frogs. I didn't like this rod for any of that. I thought it was a little too slow for jigs, a little too slow for my Texas rigs for my liking. It didn't load up fast enough for me, and same with frogs. In open water, it was okay for frogs, but if you're fishing really heavy cover, this rod just felt a little too mushy for me. I think it's that more moderate bend to it that wasn't my favorite. But the last thing that I didn't like about this rod, obviously, was the price tag. And the dirty little secret is most of the people that are telling you out there that you need to buy a $500 rod are getting theirs for free. That's just how the world works, unfortunately. But for me, that ain't the case. I had to watch my credit card get swiped for it as a little piece of me died and my receipt printed out. So I feel like I've earned the right to say anytime that a rod costs $500, the price tag is going to be a negative for me. But with that being said, if you go down the rabbit hole of big baits and you've got big swim baits, big glide baits, your nice resin, handmade, hand-tuned baits that are going to run you $125 to $250 each, depending on who makes them. In that respect, this rod is the price tag of like 2 to 3 of those baits. So that helped me put it in perspective a little bit, that if I'm going to go down this road and try to throw and master these big, expensive baits, then this rod is just another one of those eye-boggling expenses on that list. So really quickly to recap here, what I liked about this rod, it's a clean-looking rod with a split grip cork handle. It's got a matte black finish to it. It's got a comfortable reel seat with 2 blank contact points for your 2 back fingers. It's got double reinforced guides throughout the entire rod, which is rare to find and helps with that durability when you're out there throwing those big baits. It's extremely versatile and it can fill a void for 7, 8, 9 different techniques in one rod. It's got a nice soft tip, plenty of backbone, and great sensitivity, all in a more compact 7-foot length, perfect for working those type of baits standing in a kayak. Now, the negatives, I'm not crazy about the smaller trigger on the handle or the emperor knob above the reel seat. It wasn't my favorite for bottom contact baits like jigs and Texas rigs or frogs because it was just a little too slow, and the price tag is enough to give anybody a heart attack. But overall, the Megabass P5 Tequila Baccarac rod, 7-foot, extra heavy, regular, moderate action rod, has earned a spot in my rotation despite its stomach-turning price tag. So that is our final thoughts on the P5 Tequila Baccarac. Again, I'm not here to tell you you need one or don't need one. I'm just here to tell you my experiences with it and kind of give you a little bit more information on a rod that some of you may consider, a lot of you probably won't consider. I understand that completely. Again, that's the fun part of the show. We get to go over all different kinds of budgets and different kinds of gear. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. And not only is the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium, but this entire podcast is powered by Dakota Lithium. My Kayak motor is powered by Dakota Lithium. My electronics are powered by Dakota Lithium. There's only one battery that I trust with my precious time, my safety, and my success out there on the water. That iconic blue battery with the red top. You know it from a mile away. They're just the best in the business. That's because Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster. They last up to 4 times longer. They have 100% US-based customer support, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty on all of their batteries standard. So whether you need a 10 amp hour or a 100 amp hour, whether you need 12 volt, 24 volt, 36 volt, the boys at Dakota Lithium have you covered. And because you listen to Tackle Talk, you can use code TACKLETALK5 to save 5% off your entire purchase. That helps them know that we sent you, and it saves you money on your next battery purchase. Again, that's code TACKLETALK5 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, everybody, and finally here, we are going to jump into the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithim.com.
All right, our first question here is from Manny S., who says, "Hey, Andrew, so 2 weeks ago in the iCast episode, you talked about the new Lowrance Eagle Eye package that supposedly comes with everything one would need for forward-facing sonar for under $1,000. My question is, why is it so cheap? Why does it cost so much less than most of the other options, including those from the same company, Lowrance? What are the differences between this and, say, a regular active target? It has to be worse for the price point, right? Thanks, Manny." Hey, Manny. So this is a good question to start out, and I've answered this question a couple times to individual people in messages since that episode came out, but it's probably good to get it out there for everybody. There are obvious differences between that new Lowrance Eagle Eye forward-facing sonar package and something like a full active target setup from Lowrance, the same company, and there should be. Just the transducer alone for Active Target 2 from Lowrance is like $1,700. That's almost double what the entire new Eagle Eye package costs with a transducer and a 9-inch screen and graph included. So of course, there are going to be some sacrifices there. The first sacrifice is that the transducer itself that comes with that Eagle Eye package, the cheaper option, does not do side imaging. Plain and simple, you get no side imaging with that system whatsoever, where almost every other graph nowadays in that 9-inch range that has a half-decent transducer with it will give you some sort of side imaging. The Eagle Eye package from Lowrance does not. Now, when it comes to the live sonar, which is the biggest selling point for this new $999 package, the absolute biggest difference is that the field of view of your live sonar is smaller. The area that you're able to see is less than that of, say, an active target transducer or live scope or mega live, which are the 3 big options on the market right now for bass fishing. So what does that mean? Well, I guess if you think of the area that you can see on that screen on forward-facing sonar as like a pizza slice that shoots out from the front of your boat, it's very tight right at the boat, and then the further away you get from your boat, that sonar shoots out and it gets wider in the area that it can cover. So it's like a triangle shape, or a pizza slice, I guess, where the crust of the pizza slice is far away from your boat, and then the point where you take your first bite of pizza is your boat. Well, that pizza slice on like a regular forward-facing sonar transducer is like 1/3 of the pizza. It's a big area that you can see and you can cover. Well, with the Lowrance Eagle Eye, that pizza slice is much smaller. So it's probably, like 3 times smaller than your traditional live sonar because it has less beams. The way live sonar works is that pizza slice is made up of multiple beams that are separately shooting, and then the software puts them together into one continuous image and field of view. The Eagle Eye package has less beams, so you get a more narrow field of usable space. Now, the same is true with the down orientation on that eagle eye. That pizza slice that you can normally see, that triangle, is much more narrow. It still works fine, it's just a smaller field of view, and it doesn't extend all the way to the edges of the screen like your normal live down would look. That's how they were able to not only make this unit under half the price of its competitors, but it's also how they were able to give you a transducer that doesn't need its orientation changed to go from view to view. So on my live scope that I have, that I barely use ever, if I use that live sonar and I want to go from forward mode to down mode to perspective mode, I physically have to pull my transducer out of the water and change its direction. With the Lowrance Eagle Eye package, you don't have to do that because it has less beams and each beam is dedicated to a particular direction. So instead of using all of those beams all the time in different orientations, it just uses like one, I guess, probably for forward and one for down. So you can use that same transducer without having to move it. So the bottom line is, no, of course the new Eagle Eye package from Lowrance is not exactly like Active Target or Live Scope or Mega Live. It's a third of the price, and Lowrance still sells Active Target. If it was the exact same, then Lowrance would just start losing money and no one would buy an Active Target system anymore. So it's a completely different setup with less features, less frills, but still has the basics that you need to use forward-facing sonar and live down sonar at a much cheaper price point than we've ever seen before. So I hope that clears some of that up. As with all products, especially those from iCast, I'd love to be able to sit here and go into like excruciating detail and do all of the ton of research on all of these items, but that episode was already 2.5 hours, so I don't think anybody is up for like a 10-hour episode of Tackle Talk. So I guess it's good that we get the chance to answer this question for everybody to hear today. All right, the next question here is from Josh Butler, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I'm a loyal listener to Tackle Talk and a hardcore bass angler. I've got 2 questions today regarding spillway fishing. Part 1, I'm looking to get into spillway fishing as I've heard there's some great opportunities from the bank. This specific spillway gets pressured a decent little bit. Is there anything I can do to get better at spillway fishing or to start catching fish from the spillway? I'm primarily interested in catching bass, but would be happy with sawguy as well. Part 2, how do I get into muskie fishing? This spillway is famous for having plenty of muskie as well, and many people catch them while fishing for bass and sawguy. Can I fish with a 7-foot heavy fast, or is that too underpowered considering it only throws up to an ounce?" Hey, Josh, good to hear from you, man. Josh and I actually have a pretty cool tradition at the Columbus Fishing Expo where his dad takes a photo of us every year standing side by side. I get to watch Josh keep getting taller and taller, and then I end up staying the same size every time. So it's been awesome to see Josh obviously grow as not just a human, but as an angler too. Josh is going to be a force to be reckoned with on the water. So Josh, absolutely, I 100% know who you are. And this question is awesome because I know the spillway that you're talking about. I'm not going to name it because we don't spot burn on this show, but 100%, no questions asked, Josh, I know the exact spot you're talking about. So your description of gets pressured a decent little bit is an understatement, my man. That place gets absolutely hammered, and I've only fished there probably once or twice maybe, so I'm not sure about that specific spillway in general as far as like, some of these tips I'm about to give you, but my best advice for spillway fishing in general is it's all about the spot. And it's always this sort of delicate mix of being there at the right time and hoping no one else is in the spot that you want to fish. Spillways are crowded. You can show up one day, there's 100 people there, and it makes it absolutely miserable because you're like shoulder to shoulder and it's terrible. But my favorite spots to fish in a spillway, depending on their size, are usually just below the main discharge at some sort of like secondary wall or secondary little underwater dam or something if it has one. So one of my favorite dams to fish around here has the main dam, and then about 50 yards down, it has a second underwater dam, or sort of like a ledge almost, that doesn't poke out of the water, but it's down there. And that is my favorite spot on that entire spillway. Everybody flocks to the main dam and the main flow that comes out of that dam, and oftentimes people either don't know it exists or just ignore that secondary wall. And that second wall holds fish, especially sawguy at night. So I would look for those spots in the spillway that have some sort of feature that might not get fished as hard or as often as the other popular spots in that that spillway and learn to fish that spot really well, because then you have less of a chance of driving all the way there, showing up, and now there's 20 dudes all right at the dam in your favorite spot, and there's nowhere for you to fish that you have any confidence in. So having a few favorite, a little bit more obscure spots at those spillways are always nice. But the other beautiful part about spillways in general is that there's always going to be fish there. Fish replenish there all the time because they either get flushed out from the main lake or from the water source above that spillway, and the fish also replenish by swimming up from downstream and reaching that dead end of that dam. So it's always going to be a fishy area. You just have to be there at the right time and keep putting in the cast if you're in it for things, especially like bass. But that particular spillway, like you mentioned, has muskie too. And muskie are a weird fish. There's always muskie in that spillway almost all times a year. So just cast. Your 7-foot heavy is totally fine. That's way better than most of the guys down there are using at that spillway. I've seen guys, at the spillways throwing finesse spinning rods and stuff like that and catching muskie. Obviously not good for the fish, but most of those people at that spillway don't care about the fish's health anyway. Now, as far as sawguy go, my favorite time to target sawguy in a spillway is between like the months of probably November and January. So it's not the most pleasant time to fish. It's going to be cold. You're going to be out there in the dark, but we like to get there about an hour before dark. You get your bearings about you as far as your casting distance and locations and things like that, and then you fish into dark. And for us, those sawguy a lot of times seem to turn on like 30 to 60 minutes after it gets completely dark. And my theory anyway is that that's when their eyes finally start to get adjusted to that low light for the evening, since they're such visual hunters. But I really have no idea why that's the time that it seems to take off, but it is. So I hope you get some luck at the spillways, and please report back if you do well. I'd love to see some fish pictures. The next question is from Jim, and he says, if I roll up on, say, a tennis court or bigger sized thick vegetation or pad mat, where do the bass prefer to sit? At the edge, the first 10 feet, all the way back 50 feet, or more close to the shore? Thanks, man. Love the show. Probably the only fishing pod I never get tired of. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. As far as like picking apart a big grass mat for me around here, especially with something like a frog, I like to work the edge first, because once I roll up on that edge and get too close, that's something that can't be undone, and I can't unspook those fish if that's where they were. So I'm always going to try the edge first before I make my way up to the mat. If I've determined that those fish are not at the edge, then I'll get up to the mat. I'll start bomb casting toward the middle of the mat and working my way toward the edge. Now, keep track of where you get hit and where those blow-ups come from in that mat, if you get any. For me, a frog is a great search bait on grass mats, and if I get 5 blow-ups in an hour and 4 of those 5 were 3/4 of the way back to the boat, then I know those fish are a little closer to the outside of the mat than they are to the inside of the mat, unless for some reason they followed your bait all the way from the inside of the mat and all magically hit at the exact same spot, which is probably unlikely. So usually the pattern that I see anyway when I get the chance to fish weeds like that is that the higher the sun is in the sky, those fish tend to tuck back more toward the middle of the mat. And then earlier or later in the day or on cloudier days, then those fish tend to move a little bit more toward the outside of the mat. At least around here, that seems to be the pattern that I see more often than not. Okay, the next question here is from Jetty Romig, and he says, hey, Andrew, I love the podcast. Keep making great episodes. My question is, what are cheap mods that you would recommend for my new lifetime kayak? Hey, Jetty. So cheap kayak mods for a lifetime kayak. I would say my go-tos would probably be, I would make an anchor trolley or an anchor system of some sort out of some cheap paracord, like a used or really cheap anchor, and then either a $10 anchor trolley system or a retractable clothesline from Home Depot, something like that. That's probably the first item of business I would do. That way you can keep that kayak in one spot if you want to. The second thing I would probably add is a pad for your butt, because those lifetimes, depending on which one you have, aren't the most comfortable to sit in. It's usually a pretty hard plastic bottom there. So something like a cheap pad to sit on would be helpful and kind of let you fish all day long without getting sore as you're sitting down in that kayak. Third, I would probably add a donkey leash so that you can keep your fish secure in the water after you catch one when you want to get like a picture of it or something. That's a really cheap investment. That's a great add to a kayak. And then I would say like a kayak leash. So again, something that doesn't cost a whole lot, almost nothing. You can make it out of rope or ratchet strap or something. Just something to tie around the front of your kayak when you need to drag it through like super shallow water or over logs or something like that. It's way more comfortable to drag it from a leash than it is to bend all the way down and drag it from the handle at the front of that kayak. So those are some insanely cheap additions or changes that you could make to that kayak from day one to make it a little bit more convenient right out of the gate. Okay, and the last question we have here today is from Michael Smith, and he says, do you have any advice for someone with mental issues trying to find a fishing buddy when it's hard to strike up a conversation with people? I wanted to say that I appreciate everything you do, and you have a great show and know how to explain everything you talk about. Thanks. Man, this is a pretty fitting question, I would say, to end the show on today, because this right here is the power of fishing. Michael, I don't know what mental issues you have. It's none of my business, but I really believe that fishing is the great equalizer. I have met so many of my best friends through fishing, and so many of them are people that I would never have hung out with if it weren't for fishing. We're all just so different. We have different jobs, different backgrounds, different pasts, just people that I probably wouldn't have even crossed paths with because, you know, I'm a pretty straight-laced guy. I've got a job where I wear a suit jacket most days to work. I don't really drink anymore. I've never touched drugs, but now some of my absolute best friends in the world are guys that are 7 years in recovery from hard drugs and have had very different pasts and upbringings than I did. And guess what? None of that matters because we've all bonded over our intense obsession with fishing, and then that was the bridge that then led us to just become great friends that would do anything for each other, fishing or not. So it's the same with you, man. None of that other stuff matters, whether it be someone's past, someone's baggage, social awkwardness, mental health issues. None of that matters when we're on the water. Fishing is this beautiful way of connecting people that would never have otherwise connected and forming some of the strongest friendships in the most unlikely of places. So for you, Michael, I would recommend two things probably. I would say one, use social media to reach out to other anglers in your area. And it doesn't have to be some immediate creepy, hey, they're a person I've never met before. Do you want to go fishing tomorrow? But it could be something as easy as just starting to interact with them. Introduce yourself, share some local tips, whatever. And then at some point, you guys can meet up, you can go fishing together, and then a friendship starts. Or the other thing I would recommend is just go up and introduce yourself and say hey to people that you see out fishing in the same spots that you fish. That's how I met most of my good fishing buddies around here. Just seeing them out, we fish the same areas. So you go up and you say, hey, you doing any good? Or yeah, I come here and I fish quite a bit too. Hope everything's going well. I actually do pretty well on the other side here, on the other side of this bend, or whatever it may be, right? You're just starting a genuine conversation. That goes a long way to help make friendships in general. And that's obviously true in fishing too. But the awesome part is unlike, meeting some girl at a bar or some person at a networking event or whatever, you already know that you have something in common with these folks, and it's fishing. It's a natural conversation starter and something that helps start friendships right off the bat, that shared interest in fishing, which is why I said at the beginning, no matter who you are, where you grew up, your past, your job, your hobbies, none of that matters. Fishing is the great equalizer. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. As always, you can go over to tackletalkpodcast.com, click mailbag. There you can submit your own mailbag question for your chance to be heard on an upcoming episode. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on YouTube at Tackle Talk Podcast. You can email us, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.